welcome to the next edition of the Value Exchange podcast. I am Annabelle Lambert and I am here with my regular co-host Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Good morning, all.
Thank you. Today we are super excited to be joined by Dmitry Fedotov from the Youth Association, who we met, I don't know, maybe 12 months, just over 12 months ago, 2022 anyway. It seems ages ago. It feels like a lot of water has passed under the bridge since we were last talking. But Dmitry has spent, safe to say, I mean, he can tell you his story, of course, most of his life working in the youth work area, because it's something that gives him much motivation and on a mission to help young people. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dmitry, please do tell us who you are, what you're about, where you are, what you do. A little bit about you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Annabelle, and thanks, Rob, as well. So I am Dmitry Fedotov. I'm Operations Director at the Youth Association, and we are a regional youth work charity based in West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire. We're actually one of the oldest youth work organisations in the world. We've been around since 1904, so 119 years this year. And I've been working there for 14 years now. So since 2009, I've been working at the association, and I've been in youth work since 2005. So soon coming up to 20 years. And you're right, Annabelle, I've devoted my entire career thus far to youth work, and I've developed a massive love for the profession and the vocation of youth work.
And how did you get into it? We always kind of like, that foundation or origin story that, you tripped up on a pavement and suddenly you found yourself as a youth worker. Yeah. So what was the origin story?
There's a bit of a story, yeah, and I'll take you there. And I think there's something there about my passion for helping others. So I probably originated in the fact that I came here as a migrant, as a young boy with my family from the former USSR, from the Soviet Union, so into a completely different world, aged nearly 5. So I was kind of 5 years born and growing up in Latvia, on the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic, as it was back then, and then moved to the UK and received a lot of help. We received a lot of help when we came here. So that kind of inspiration to help others, no doubt, stems in part from that. Fast forward 15 years after that, and I just finished. So I'd grown up in Doncaster. I moved from Latvia to Doncaster in South Yorkshire, and I went to study university, Sheffield Hallam University. I went to study communication studies, and I'd finished my first year of uni. In maxing out my overdrafting and loads of debt, like we all do, and in need of some sort of paid employment. And friends of mine were stacking shelves and doing bar work and things like that. And I did a couple of bits, but at the end, sort of the summer between my first and second year, I received a letter through the door from my university, from Sheffield Hallam, saying we've got some grant funding for a year for a scheme mentoring. So it's the initiative was to train a bunch of students at university, to place them into secondary schools, match them up with year 11 pupils, and put them through a process of mentoring. And it was paid, so it was brilliant. And I thought, right, this sounds right up my street. So I applied, I got that. I undertook a very brief bit of training, I think it was a weekend's worth of training. I got posted out in a secondary school, ironically back in Doncaster, in my local area where I was from. So I spent one academic year supporting 4 15, 16-year-olds, meeting with them once a week, and kind of going through life's challenges and kind of attempting, do my best to inspire them to go on to further and higher education. It got to the end of the academic year, perhaps May, June time, and the scheme ended. So the job ended, and I thought, well, I loved that. That was brilliant. Give me some more of that. I found this, or somehow identified this term youth work. I didn't know what it was, but I heard of youth work as a thing. And I took a step forward. And while my friends were in their student accommodation playing Mario Kart on the M64 and FIFA and things like that, I grabbed
That's
a mate.
aging you, M64.
It was already retro back then. It was already a trending version back then. And I think that's why we're
I'm a
playing
Mega
it.
Drive girl.
Yeah, same, yeah.
Even older.
So I know. So it's uber retro right now. But I grabbed a mate and we spent an afternoon walking around Doncaster town centre, walking into every council-looking building, information-looking building, places that help people looking building. I think we went to a homeless shelter and everywhere, just so I could go in, speak to someone about youth work and explain what my recent background was and that I want to get into youth work, and just crying out for someone to tell me about youth work. What is it? How do I get into it? And it was like the fourth or fifth place I entered was a place called The Bridge. It was an information, advice and guidance centre in Doncaster town centre. And I was chatting to a worker there, a member of staff, about how to get into youth work, and she was giving me some advice on volunteering and who to go and see and things like that. And in terms of stars aligning, another professional was sitting at the table, filling out some paperwork, having a coffee, obviously involved in that wider service in Doncaster, overheard our conversation and said, oh, actually, a guy called Steve Wilson has just got some youth engagement worker posts out, trainee posts, 10 hours a week. You don't need a qualification. And it's exactly what I needed. I needed something part-time while I was studying, and I needed something that didn't require the qualification that I didn't have in youth work. So I grabbed an application form, I applied, I was successful, I got the job. So that summer of 2006, I'd just done a year of mentoring, and I started my first what I call proper youth work job, doing what I now know to be detached youth work, and I didn't realise it at the time. So I found myself going round Doncaster 3 nights a week with a senior worker, either on foot, into parks, onto street corners, or on what I can only describe as a camper van kitted out as a mobile youth club inside, doing youth engagement activities. And it seemed very benign, very kind of not driven by challenge or a progressive or developmental element. It seemed like I was just having a kick around with young people at the time. And if there's one thing I regret, is that nobody really sat me down at the time and told me why this is important in the world and what we're actually doing and what underlies all the activities. But at the time I was getting paid, I liked it, I enjoyed it, I did that. But after a year of doing that, I'd finished my degree with 2 years part-time experience of working with young people. Then some other stars aligned, because Sheffield Hallam University, that summer, that September, as I finished my degree, started their first ever youth work course that wasn't a degree, because I wasn't about to start again with another degree, but it was a graduate diploma, eligible only for graduates, pitched at level 6, so the same level as a degree. I think those courses were unheard of. It might have even been the first of its kind, that's not quite a BA or a master's and sits somewhere in between. So I was on the first ever intake of that course, and it was very affordable at the time, which actually, if that hadn't have been there, I think I might have switched and gone into another kind of career path that paid a good salary for a graduate. Actually, what I was able to do is get more hours, kind of top up my hours to 25, 30 hours a week at the youth service over in Doncaster, working for the local authority where I was, doing other things. So not just detached youth work, but other jobs in the day and things like that, while studying on a 2-year part-time graduate diploma course. So at the end of that graduate diploma course, I've had 4 years experience of youth work and a level 6 qualification in youth work, as well as my degree. So I was really, really fortunate. And fast forward a bit of time after that, a senior youth worker position came up here at the Youth Association to go and manage a detached youth work team in Barnsley, and that's where I went.
So it's a hugely inspiring story, Dmitry, particularly in world affairs today. When you look at the number of internally displaced people, whether that is massively important about Ukraine or other places in the world where through natural disaster or war or famine or whatever, that young people, all people, but young people in particular displaced. And here's somebody 5-10 years old, young people, and you actually when you get it right and help somebody, that's turned into a life of give back, a life of service that actually look after some young people, and the young people turn into middle-aged people and old people, and be forever giving. And there just doesn't seem to be any end to the giving. Now, we might not monetize that, we might not go, oh yeah, what's the but actually just the story of your life is so prescient today with the issues that we're facing all over the world.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to come on to just my hobby horse of today, which is about money, and a lot of the work that is socially valuable has been driven by charity, with philanthropists, with grants, with government grants, with and there's a lot of stress that we see in the system at the moment about services that have over the years, if over your lifetime, been taken for granted, being quite stressed because of lack of finances at the moment. And I wonder what your experience is in terms of the money side of it. About obviously you've made this pay for yourself as a living, but you work for an organisation that actually has to find the money as well. So do you see strains in the system generally about money?
Yes, there are. Yeah, and there's probably more of a nuanced story there as well. So, and for example, right now at the Youth Association, we don't have massive strains on money right now. This year, last year, next year. 10 years ago, we did, and I think that's the nuanced thing. Having said that, maybe we're desensitized to strains because we as a charity, a youth work charity of our size, and I think I speak on the sector, on behalf of the sector when I say this, we never start any given financial year knowing exactly where our budget is going to be made in that year. So we've always got an income gap that we make up in year. And in good years, we make it up about 6 months into a 12-month financial year. In a bad year, we either don't make that up and we have we don't end in surplus, or we make it up right towards the back end. So then you're relying on your reserves and things like that. So actually, I'll just backpedal a little bit on what I started out with. It's always a strain. It's always a strain, and it's always a difficulty. We are in a fortunate position. We've protected ourselves and made ourselves as sustainable as possible and built that into the fabric of the team. So that income generation now happens all over the place, and our bets are very much hedged. So we have probably 30 different funders a year funding around 10, 11 projects. So everything's kind of stacked up. So when funds disappear,
when I listened to the story on that, it reminded me back in the day, 25 years ago, of the story in EY, where you started a year and you might have 4 or 5 or 6 months of paid for revenue for your staff, and then you don't know where that's going. So then the stress is, how do you actually pay your salaries, for the rest of the year? And I think that's probably in any organisation. I'd be bold enough to say that, very similar issue. And it, right now at the moment, there is in the federal government in America this spectre of shutting down because they haven't signed off. They haven't actually got approval for their next round of spending. So, the possibility is nobody in government will get paid after whenever the date is. So I think whether you're government, charity or business, we're all kind of dealing with who pays for that. But some of these things that we do, whether it's emptying the dustbin or providing children's services, vulnerable young children are kind of not really negotiable in a developed society, really, are they?
Of course not. No, and you've hit on a couple of interesting points there as well, because youth work has never been a statutory service like children's services are, and therefore is very, very vulnerable, and it gives it that extra vulnerability. Changing the bins has to happen, and social work and that children and family support has to happen by law. It's statutory. What happened? Our sector was massively hit, and the legacy continues to be felt to this day by government austerity measures 2010 to 2015. I can't stress enough how we're still feeling the ramifications of that now. I always paint this picture that, because that is how my memory serves me, is that we were the second service to go after libraries. Libraries were seen as the easiest thing to go and close off, and youth services were seen like the second easiest thing to close off, because it wasn't exactly clear what we do. It wasn't nursing, policing, or social work and teaching. It was kind of this other thing that happens under the radar that purportedly has loads of social value, but we can't quite see what that is. And there wasn't therefore the potential of the big backlash like there is when you nursing cuts and teaching cuts.
Until now, when we miss it so much.
And now absolutely, and quite right. There's a backlash, but we were heavily cut. The sector was heavily cut, and the implications of that were twofold. One is that youth workers disappeared from the service. So youth workers 10 years ago, many of them retired, many took redundancies, many moved careers into different professions sideways. Many were forced to do it because what they were given in light of youth centre and youth service closures, they started to be given, and social work was overrun at that point and still is now.
Still is now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So social workers, I remember in Doncaster, social workers having caseloads of 30 odd, which is just unmanageable. And so youth workers were given the social work light kind of badge. And it was like, right, the lower end child protection cases, let's give to these youth workers because they can do something there. And it's not what we're trained for. You might as well give it to a firefighter. It's like completely different.
And they do that, don't they, as well? So
yeah.
Who is there doing nothing right now?
Oh, well, I mean, there's that whole saga about mental health call-outs for the police, and there's a lot of this kind of that you could chuck into this debate, really. But what we're left with then, sorry, I said twofold. I never quite got to the point. So one of those things is a depleted workforce. So when funding has started trickling back, and trickling is probably the right word, but actually has probably been on the increase since about 2017, year on year. There seems to be, particularly around the pandemic time, more and more funding available that could be used to support youth work. The workforce couldn't keep up. So suddenly jobs are popping up left, right and centre, and vacancies, and there's not enough qualified youth workers out there to fill those vacancies. And that's really a tragedy. And then the other tragedy, the second of the twofold problem, was that a generation of young people now have gone through without the youth services and the youth support that previous generations had. So now fewer people had the support of a youth worker. And youth workers classically, and it is very person-centred and outcomes focused, but it also, there's this big positive byproduct that youth workers achieve of picking up things early, intervening early, and proactively in whether it's young people's mental health, young people kind of going off the rails, entering kind of criminality, being exploited, and all that kind of stuff. Youth workers are fantastic at kind of like on a bowling alley, the barriers that you lift up to stop your ball going off the
I need
edge.
those.
That was kind of a youth worker role for
It's
using it.
almost like the preventative maintenance, isn't it, of getting your car serviced
Yeah,
every year.
exactly.
So,
Yeah,
if you
that
don't
was
do that,
that's another analogy there. Yeah, so and that was what youth workers, like I said, it wasn't the primary purpose and isn't of a youth worker, but it probably is the secondary purpose of youth worker. So you've got a generation of young people, you've got violent crime, high in many areas in the country. Knife crime increases in child criminal exploitation and all the stuff that we hear about in the news, and this epidemic of mental health issues, and the amount of young people suffering with lack of confidence and anxiety, and exactly the thing that youth workers were great at doing. So we've ended up as a nation, but certainly the government, cutting the nose off to spite the face, and really, really short-sighted cuts that took place. So and that's been a problem, and you can still see the implications now.
So can I ask?
Look, go on, Annabelle.
No. I was just back to your sort of your pathway, and having a child who's just gone to university and is working out, what she's going to do, what her opportunities are. Like you talked about, needs some extra cash. I mean, she's not debt ridden yet, but she will get there. Just as everybody has to. But who chooses that pathway? That's the choice. She's making. So I was just interested. You talk about knocking down doors. You talk about getting this paid opportunity. And with a bit of mother's pride. My daughter. She's already signed up to do some help with refugees, because the university run a program which is like, go down to the local centre and help with English, and do what you can to support these people, because their life's a nightmare and we need to help. So she signed up to do a bit of that, but it's all voluntary. And where she's going to get paid are those spaces. And no offense to retail, hospitality, those things, but I wish there were opportunities to deliver social value that young people could engage with, that gave them a little bit of extra cash, that then help them see. You talk about the generation that didn't have youth work support, and they probably feel no requirement to go into youth support because they never had any. So why would you do that? And so there'll be a back log of who's interested. And that's perhaps a bit far fetched, but because it will work the other way as well, probably. But I just wondered what those opportunities that you had, the opportunity to go knocking on doors and go, look, this is what I'm really interested in. Do you think that still exists in the world, I guess, is my question. Because I feel it's become much more difficult to connect with anything at all. Make your own pathway.
Yeah, it still exists. It will always exist, and I'll come back to that in a sec. But you are right about the backlog, and it's not in so much that people consciously think, well, I didn't have that, so why would I give it? People don't know about it because they didn't have it. So people don't know that youth work exists because they didn't have a youth worker. Yeah. So they wouldn't ever go and pursue something. They don't know what they don't know. That's the kind of backlog issue. So you were right about that. Yes, I mean, and I'm sure you're giving this advice to your daughter, and it's the advice I always give to all kind of young people is be on your front foot and don't expect opportunities to land on your doorstep. Go out and search, do that door knocking and say, I want to help out. And you generally find in life, and this applies to charities and businesses and less so local authorities and public sector bodies, but when you really put a good impression of yourself as a great people person, who is kind of capable and well-rounded, and you're knocking on a door and you're giving all those kind of non-verbal cues and the rest of it, that general likability pays dividends, and you end up getting offered stuff, and stuff kind of ends up presenting itself to you. Suddenly there is a paid opportunity to do something. And it's because people like us, people who manage third sector organisations, actually are really interested in well-rounded, intelligent, articulate and likeable individuals, because that's the best kind of foundation on which to build a whole set of skills and experiences. So the amount of people I've given paid employment to, often sessional, like on the side of studies and that kind of thing, but based on actually this just seems like a great person who'd lend themselves, is countless, like dozens and dozens. Almost invariably they're doing a youth work degree and they're coming to me for a placement opportunity and they do really well. And then we say, right, we want to keep you on. And by the way, there's a job in it for you now, part-time. So even at our place, that concept still exists. I love the idea of going to the refugee centre and knocking on the door and can I help out? I absolutely endorse doing that. And like I said, you do that enough times and you find yourself with often it is supply work, bank staff work, and 0 hours kind of work. But you kind of got to start somewhere as a student, and I place a lot of value in that as much as it comes with its challenges. Yeah. So I do think it still exists. I take the point. I think I'm reading between the lines, and the undertone is that those maybe things are fewer and further between, and it's not an easy thing to find. But you put your front foot forward, and you go and not.
Actually, my undertone is I really feel people should be valuing these things more, because they do such an important thing in society that we can see in the generation that we've lost. Has caused massive social problems that were never intended. Nobody. Probably, well, I'm sure there were some very decent people arguing the case for youth services at the time, but they were ignored, and here we are. So it's more, do you need to buy more of this thing over here, or would you like more support in the community? Where do you want to put your effort and your money? Where do you want people to engage, I guess, is the question, which is not an easy question to answer, and it's not the way the world is set up, but I'm on a bit of a mission.
Yeah, you're quite right.
Sorry, interruption, but I'm thinking that for the audience that doesn't know what on earth youth work is, we might be shortcutting. It's like, I want an easy to understand definition of youth work. Now, I want to give you an opportunity, Dmitry, to give your own definition of that. But before, let me just temper it with the context that we've talked on this episode about outcome commissioning and youth work being difficult to justify in some people's mind, as opposed to bins or libraries, statutory service of children's services or whatever. And yet, the story of Dmitry the refugee and a life of youth work, and the preventative bit of, actually, if you go off the rails, you're going to cost everybody, including yourself, a lot of money by doing county lines and drugs and stuff like So there is, in my mind, it is almost stupid that you couldn't justify preventative maintenance of the rails on the bowling alley, or the service your car. And we need to particularly support young people, because young people are our future. Stupid, So it's kind of like, for me, there seems to be a moral or intuitive case that if you want the numbers, I'll make them up. I know that we spend a lot of money for nothing. Why wouldn't we spend money on this? But for people who just like want to bust through the jargon and understand, okay, youth work, I've got young people, but what does it all mean? How would you define it?
Yeah, gosh. I can definitely do that. I can define it, and I don't know how soundbitey it'll be, but I can certainly define it, because I'm doing that all the time. But I just love everything else you said there. There's so much in there as well. But coming back to that one then, so So youth work, it's a process of informal education done in social groups that is progressive and developmental, and has takes account of a bunch of starting points as well as a bunch of end destinations. So kind of that, I know that that's a bit abstract how I've put that, but I'll probably give some examples.
Well, I can just say examples of that. If you just then,
Yeah.
it would give me some examples of what do you mean by that informal.
Yeah. So youth. So for example, youth work uses things like the arts. So it could use the arts, and youth workers could facilitate an arts program as an activity for the purposes of building a skill set, building some confidence, instilling some leadership, improving people's patience, and improving someone's CV in a group setting through the way you facilitate the arts program. Equally, you could do exactly the same, but with a sport or with some other level of recreational activity. But the key, I'll tell you some key indicators of what youth work is, as opposed to, because it often gets confused with education, with social work, and with youth offending work, and all these professions are very, very different. So youth work takes as a starting point the needs and place of that young person and where they're at right now, rather than either an adult imposed label or a box that defines the profession. And an antithesis there is the education system, whose starting point is the national curriculum and something young people have to fit through. And therefore, you have to sit in a class of 30 people for 6 hours a day, and you have to do this. And it's a legal requirement and it's mandatory. So youth work doesn't start with a particular starting point. And the second point there I've kind of touched on is the voluntary relationship, which is different in schools, in youth justice systems, and in social work. Probably mostly relatable to sort of sports clubs and things where actually the young person is there and engaging in that relationship because they want to be there.
It's enjoyable.
When the young person wants to be there, it opens up a bunch of doors that aren't open when they don't want to be there or when they feel they've been forced to be there. So that's a second defining principle. A third one is the group element of it. So unlike counselling and CBT and talking therapies and social work and a bunch of other stuff, including youth justice, youth work isn't a one-to-one therapy process. It's a group process, and it takes into account that as human beings we're social creatures and we learn best from doing with and through each other, and particularly within peer groups. So youth work's probably the only profession out there that works with a group of friends, not a group of people who have come together for a particular purpose. Although sometimes that's the case as well. But our youth workers will go out onto a park and will build relationships with a bunch of mates and actually redefine sometimes the identity then of that group and what they believe they exist for, and through that same old recreational activity. And the fourth, I think, defining principle that I haven't mentioned yet is how youth work takes into account societal power imbalances between young people and adults. So it seeks to redress that balance a little bit and tip the balances of societal power in favour of young people where possible. So giving more power, whether it's more voice, more. So, for example, whether that's giving young people the ability and the means to paint their local park bench to improve, literally just something small like that, or to run a campaign, or to run a podcast series, or a radio station, or whatever it might be. But that's really important, because what that kind of addresses is the fact that adults run the world. We run businesses, we run the governments, we run the councils, we run the police, we run schools, and young people actually have no societal power, really. And
I'd like to hand over the world to some 6-year-olds and see where we get. That's what I like to do. Much further, I think.
Yeah. Well, this is the point insofar as that there's not many professions out there that that exist for that purpose. I think that's the defining principle, because you could argue in schools there's plenty of things that empower young people. Yes, there is, but school's purpose is to get them through a formal education system, and youth work actually exists to give a bit of power away to young people in loads of different respects. So I know that wasn't a short, sweet.
No, it was. I mean, I think it was beautiful because it was almost clinical in your, your addressing principles that made me as a, less than educated than you in youth work, kind of think of framing it in very practical ways. And I'm not sure about Annabelle, but I'm now led to my next question of I can see that the purity of youth work in its intent of doing exactly you say, empowering people, doing groups, non-directional social learning, all of that stuff is a little bit oil and water in terms of where the system of commissioning outcomes and say, well, are they going to get a GCSE at the end of this, Dmitry, or what? Or just, I just want to, are they going to get a job? Or, so I can see that the oil and water of the commissioning system is a bit, you're doing the right thing against a system that is probably doing the wrong thing, or that somewhere in the middle, you kind of need to find out how to talk to one another. How do we do that? It's like,
and that's been our sort of nemesis and downfall, but also we've learned how to do it, hence to an extent, and hence why we're still here and thriving. I'll come to how. You're right, though. We don't necessarily live in a value-driven society, and I think that's the point you keep hitting on all the time. You guys at Ethos is the so the target-driven culture. I think it began with New Labour. It might not have done, but it seems to have done quite a while ago. But that was our big downfall when austerity kicked in. Is prove your outcomes, and we not only were we never very good at that, and there's the oil and water thing. There was probably a conscious backlash against that because the youth work community probably went, well, no, on a philosophical kind of principled basis, we're not going to be doing that, and quite right, and I kind of understand that. But then people lost their jobs and youth services were cut because that gave the green light for the government of the day to do that. So that was and continues to be a problem. I often get challenged. No, actually, it's not often enough I get challenged on this. So I end up challenging myself and saying it, which is when you profess to be driven by young people's starting points and profess to be completely organic, and you put it really well, Rob, you said something like directionless, or the idea is, youth work doesn't have a predefined end destination. How can you make any money? So how can you draw down grants that often come with a specific purpose? And what we've, I think, quite cleverly learned to do as a sector is do this. I think I can offer an example before I can articulate what it is. So you take violence reduction monies. There's loads currently up and down the country. There have been for the last few years, and it's the big government sort of driven response to knife crime.
Yeah, we've done a lot of that. Yeah.
Getting rid of youth services.
Yeah. Well, sorry. But that kind of, those grants become available, and how do you take on those grants philosophically when you profess to not be driven by the labels of adult imposed end destinations and stuff? And we figured out a way that we can, and we do, and quite successfully. So we kind of, what we do is what we don't do is take that money on and promise to reduce knife crime and violent crime. We don't, because we can't, and it'd be wrong of us too. And actually, then it takes you down a very specified direction, a cul-de-sac. So what we say is, well, actually, we know, and research has always shown, that there's a bunch of things that tend to reduce vulnerability to perpetrating knife crime and gangs. So young people having pride and achievement. So young people achieving things and being proud of themselves, improving their self-esteem, let's say. We know that's an indicator to people leading more successful lives and outcomes. Young people have positive role models. Yeah. young people develop skills, young people broaden the horizons and see other opportunities in the world, and are actually exposed to new experiences and things like that. And actually, young people learn from an education perspective about the mechanics of child criminal exploitation and how it all works and how you're drawn in and how you can't prevent yourself getting stabbed and all that kind of stuff. And we can do those things. So if we can then take on a grant and say, do you know what we'll do? We're going to teach this stuff about how that works. We're going to ensure that in that program of activity, young people are achieving real things and feeling a sense of pride, impact on the self-esteem. We will teach everyone at least one new skill. We'll have a bunch of people working on the program from our side who are positive role models, who maybe have similar backgrounds and can be, young people can see themselves in that person or what have you. And we can achieve that. And then what we're saying to the funder and to the people with the money is actually, without compromise any of our ethics and our principles, and it being progressive and developmental, and actually not that predefined, with quite loose outcome areas, but we know that those outcome areas are invariably going to lead to only positive things, including a reduction in the susceptibility to violent crime. We can do that. And we do that with mental health, we can do that with violent crime, and we can do that with a bunch of other things. So
I think it's laudable, and we should celebrate that. Being the old cynic, and having worked with lots of these violence reduction units, I think we should be honest also about the problems that come from that funding model. Number one, we know that it ultimately is coming from the Home Office as a programme fund that's picking up actually a lot of that council money that was coming. And the Home Office funding is going to finish soon. And when you ask, well, what's going to happen just when we adjust to those, measures? Well, it's just, I think it's at the end of this year or next year, they'll be gone. And that, it's like, well, that's it. And until somebody says, oh, it would be a good idea to have a new funding stream there.
Yeah.
So there's an issue there. There's also an issue that even with the translation that you've so well articulated, that there is still the tendency to go, yeah, but, is that you're going to do it for 3 days or 3 months? And how many people are you going to do it to? And so rather than a youth work approach that might be really quite open-ended, where we go, look, we're in Doncaster, Darlington, wherever we're, Sheffield, doing this, and we've got a capacity of, let's say, a team of 10 people or 5 youth workers or whatever to support the community in whatever way, the community, we then turn that money into a set of targets that go, well, rather than doing 2 people, can you do 42 people and maybe just go to a park one day and run one group? And again, that tension in terms of the, is there. So I just wanted to really rant. You give me the opportunity. There's no, unless you want to come back on that. I didn't expect it to be a question. I just wanted to go, look, there's some problems there still.
I can, yeah. I mean, if anything, I'm more instinctively just want to add more fuel to your fire because I agree with you. So, but rather than doing that, I can sort of come back a little bit, but there's nothing that much really, because you're right. The fact is, you're right, and the we do tend to have we try and have we end up having little theories for everything at the Youth Association. We geek out on youth work, and we love that fact, and we have this this theory, like a XY axis line graph kind of theory, which pictures impact over quantity, and this is your 2 or 42 kind of thing. And we've kind of, I think, resolved that it kind of doesn't matter. You kind of end up doing both, but don't profess to have high impact levels on 42. And if you're only working with 2, you better be having high impact levels. So it's a bit of an accountability thing while also a realism thing. So if people want to send us out to the parks to work with 50 young people per night, that's all right, because as long as there's something happening there and something useful, and everyone's learning something and gaining something and seeing something useful, that's not bad. Because arguably, what happens if you're just working with the 2? What happens to the 40? So we see that as still a tick. Actually, what usually happens of the 42, 6 will emerge as core participants that you'll keep meeting, and you'll end up having another experience with them that's more impactful anyway, even though they're kind of part of the 42. So, and then on the other end of the scale, if my youth workers are constantly working with small groups, fine, but show me. I want to see all the testimony, all the life-changing outcomes and everything like that. And what ends up organisation-wide happening is bits of both. So the areas and teams you can go and visit tomorrow night who will be working with big numbers, and that's fine, and something's happening there. And there'll be teams working with smaller numbers and bigger things are happening. And that's kind of the philosophy we work by.
What a positive response.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful response. Love it. I think every time we talk to you, Dmitry, it's never frequently enough that I would just feel that we're only just getting going. We're just rolling the covers back.
Imagine we talked about something else.
Yeah. Oh dear. No, I agree.
I'm going to hand back to you.
Yeah, no, and I'm
Annabelle,
conscious of the time because we are you're well into our time now.
46 minutes into it.
Yes. So I'm sort of a bit of a closing question is how can others help youth work, going forward? What can people do, really? What can people do?
So there's I'd probably draw on 2 things because it depends on the who. I think Rob has articulated much better than I have what government decision makers, council leaders, hopefully the next government, I think realistically can do, and that is all the things we've said before. I kind of won't go over it again. It's more than just pump more money into the service. It's much more about the sustainability and its growth and things like that, and just seeing it as valuable and important and understanding why. So that, I think that in a nutshell is what they can do. What I'm kind of co-heading up a campaign across Yorkshire and Humber at the moment, and have been for a few months. That seeks to promote youth work as a profession and an attractive career pathway, and there's a lot of stuff we're putting out on social media at the moment and having things done. And
we'll put some links below. I've seen it on LinkedIn, and I think we'll put links so that people can click and support you.
Thank you. Oh, that's really useful, actually. Thank you for that. Yeah. Because one thing, just going back to what we said before about the generation of young people who have grown up without youth work and therefore don't know it's even an option, it has been. So the tragedy at the minute is that at least 8 to 10 universities up and down the country have closed the youth work courses in the last 2 years. So that the BA youth work degrees, I know it's awful, and just for numbers, because they're not getting the numbers through. And we are utterly convinced that the only reason they're not getting the numbers through is because people don't know about it. It's yes, you can argue it's not the best paid profession, but that doesn't stop all the other not amazingly paid professions drawing in numbers. And it's not always that badly paid youth work. And the fact is, people are still coming into it, just not enough. So I'm utterly convinced that when you approach a bunch of 17, 18-year-olds aspiring to go to university and say to them, there is a career you can do, even if it's just for a bit, where while you get to help young people, whilst abseiling, canoeing, playing football and mountain climbing and painting and recording music. It's so attractive for anybody, but especially for a younger person, that there's no way these courses wouldn't be able to fill the seats, because people will go just for the kind of... Plus, the degree can take you off in all sorts of directions. You can go off doing other things afterwards. So there's no real proper reason other than a lack of being out there in the public eye, that these youth work degrees are having to close. And if there's one huge thing that people could do right now, is go and shout that up a bit, because there are some courses like the one at Leeds Beckett it's more akin to being paused than closed for good, and with enough interest it can reopen again. And the ones like Hull and Sunderland, I think, are still running theirs, and perhaps are in danger of closure over the next couple of years. So there's this
and I think although the money isn't that bad, again, it's linked with this funding question about, how we cut the money that comes into an organisation, divide that up into, if you compare your skills, experience, and qualifications, to a teacher, to a doctor, a dentist, a business manager now, you're a highly qualified, highly experienced, professional who should be, earning a good amount of money for doing that. And likewise, the graduate path. So I think that anything that we could do to promote higher wages in this area, again, it's like nurses, doctors, policemen and women and people, that actually money is, again, it's just the hobby horse of this morning of just talking more about money, because actually we don't talk enough about the funding of these things. And we had a chat. There's a lord on the show a couple of weeks ago, Jim Knight, who's a sort of educational reformist, and some people who have massive ambitions to change the system. We've got to change the way money works as well. We can't see everything as a race to the bottom. No. Dmitry, I'll give you the contract if you'll work for £3 a year. It's kind of like, well, hang on.
Well, do you value the work or not? I mean, and the answer is hugely.
Or as the case was, not very hugely when everything was cut back. But you're right. The race to the bottom, the whole kind of commissioning and tendering processes, also when going down that route, value. How they work is usually, as long as you hit a certain quality criteria, it then goes on price and cost, and then you get people.
But it's kind of like, but at the end of the day, and I know that the only tool I have is a hammer. Everything looks like a nail, and the race to the bottom. But I can have Dmitry, recognizing that he's a highly experienced, qualified, compassionate, caring individual. Or I could have somebody who has no qualifications, experience, and then just go, okay, all you have to do is read the script, go to the park, and read this out, and actually, you do get what you pay for. This in this life, don't you? It's kind of like a university education is a very, very big business, and it's very expensive. And so I do want to promote higher wages.
Definitely. We're as qualified as social workers and teachers. So this is what, again, going back a few years now, youth work was put in line with them in terms of the level of qualification you need to do the job. And yet we're under-recognised all the time. And there's this idea that a youth worker, not everyone's subscribed to it, but it's a common misconception that a youth worker moving sideways into social work is like a move upwards. And it isn't. It's just a different profession, but as qualified. It is undervalued. And I guess maybe I'm desensitized and bigger cynic than anyone else now in this, maybe because I'm in the profession. But there is actually what we call the JNC, Joint Negotiating Committee, recognised scale that is it's used up and down the country by many organisations, particularly local authorities, that puts it's a pay scale that puts it more in line with those professions. Not all third sector organisations can afford to pay it, and that then relates back to what you were saying there, Rob, about the devaluation and stuff. In the cost of living crisis, it's no wonder people are, it's one of those where money is a hygiene factor until you can't pay your bills. Do you know what I mean? It's when things are all right, people can make the choice to to do this profession because they love it for a bit less money.
Until you get into trouble, yeah.
Yeah. And then you can't make that choice. It's not then a choice to make. And this is the problem we've got right now over the last year.
Annabelle, forgive me, but there's one lead on, last one from me, I promise, and then I promise them. But so how do you look after your own well-being then? There's a little question, because money's part of that, but then there's physical and emotional and relational and that. So, you know, you're well as a person. How do you look after yourself?
And is that directed at me or our staff team?
Yeah, you. Just you. Just you.
Just me. Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, what a broad question. This is going to be the most awful answer in terms of its suitability to a podcast. But I'll try and give everything. This might be a stream of consciousness more than anything. But I mean, I guess I've got a starting point of being quite self-aware, well-rounded, good self-esteem anyway, which protects me from ill mental health and that kind of thing to an extent. I think then there's all the other bits. It's going to be boring for the podcast, but I've got family, I've got 3 loving children and wife, and fortunate enough to own a nice house and all that kind of stuff. So I've got all those protective factors in my life. I think are really important. It's probably more important than, I go to the gym once a week and that kind of stuff. On top of that, there is that I tend to eat well. I tend to I work out a couple of times a week, and do those kinds of things as well. But I've got to take it back to my workplace a little bit as well to make the connection, because I am happy in my job. I love my job to bits. I'm really passionate about it, and I've consciously tried to create an environment at work and a particular staff setup that breeds positivity at all times. And so I've done things like, so we have 4 wellness activities a year, including an overnight staff sort of residential stay. We're very big on kind of mentoring, support and supervision and that kind of thing as well. And we've, through our recruitment practices, or I've got to say my recruitment practices over the last few years, I've been really, really careful about getting the right blend of people to foster that positive environment as well. And so happy work life plus, you know, stable home
life. Yeah. What a wonderful, beautiful answer. What a beautiful way to round the podcast stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
thank you so much.
Let's keep in touch. Yeah,
for your time.
It was a real pleasure. That I really appreciate you inviting me on, actually. And